Hi, guys.
What's up?
Thank you guys so much for your patience. We had some technical difficulties, but we are A-OK. We're good to go. So welcome to Phoenix Perspective. I'm so excited to be back doing live events and to be able to hang out with you guys, and especially with this guy down here, because this collab has been a very long time in the making. So
Super long.
yeah, entirely too long. We shouldn't have waited this long, but it's okay.
Give it
That just
5.
means it's gonna be great.
Bam. And it was even longer because of my dumb modem. Listen, Sam is a gracious host, everybody, because she said we were having technical difficulties. Like, that was me. That was all me. I was like glitchy and slow, and I rebooted my computer, but I didn't restart the modem. And of course, it acted up. So,
But now you're good. And look at all these people. We've got Jeremiah and Adam, Amara. My mom is here. My stepmom. Did I say Adam? I think I said Adam. Yeah.
you can say him twice. He's worth it.
I can say him twice. Yeah, he's good. Hi,
So
Beth.
good over there.
I know. You know, when I left doing the live streams, I really missed this interaction with the audience and being able to have these conversations and everything. Hey, Meg. So I put a little ticker down at the bottom because LinkedIn has been really bad with communicating to Restream and missing some of the comments. So if you guys don't see your comments populating over here on the chat on the overlay, head over to YouTube. We're streaming over there too, and we'll be able to catch your comments over there. So without further ado, Nathan, you want to start us off with some intro?
Sure. Well, I mean, which part of this do you want to start with? Do you want to start with the Phoenix part, or do you want to start with the villains part? We got like some synergy going on here.
I feel like there is a lot of overlap between that. It's like every backstory has something, right? It has drama and tension and trauma and all sorts of things. And then there's something that changes. There's a shift that happens and a decision that gets made to determine whether you're going to be a villain or a hero. In our case, I think we're just going to be a phoenix.
Or a fee villain. What have you got over there, Adam? It looks like a fee villain. Adam's making up words for us already. Yeah.
Already.
So everybody, like the conversation that, Sam and I are always playing this game with perspectives. And the idea being that, I mean, at one point we were going to launch a live show called Perspectives Kitchen, right? And that was going to be a lot of fun because we want to play around with what our assumptions are, think about ways that we can turn those assumptions on their heads. Even just changing your frame of reference can prompt you to make new decisions. And that's a lot of what we're looking at here in this conversation. Now, for those of you who know me, you know that I love talking about villains. I love talking about villain stories. One of the things about villains that is so great is it's a little bit like a car wreck sometimes. You just can't help but look. The thing about backstories is that when we look at villains and we're kind of, appalled or like captivated and we don't know what to make of them. Well, backstories are fun because they answer the why, like all of those questions you have about who this person is, why they are the way they are. You see that stuff in the backstory. There is
Mhm.
a big difference between heroes and villains when you start thinking about that. Now, there are a lot of differences between them, but one thing that you often see is that a hero and a villain can be presented with very similar backstories, trauma, like Sam mentioned, or something like that. But what they do with it is what makes the big
Mhm.
difference. You know, you can have a villain who is traumatized in childhood, who loses their parents, right? Batman's parents are shot. Superman's whole planet is blown up. But
Well, look at Darth Vader.
Darth Vader loses his mom. He does not become a good guy.
No.
So it depends on what choices they make. And
Mhm.
Phoenixes, Sam, I know you're going to tell us, have a lot to do with choices.
Yeah. You know, I talk often about trauma and about the things that happen in my past, and my entire motto really now is your past doesn't define your future. You do. And that wasn't something that I believed for a really long time. I had believed that as I was going through my trauma, I just figured that hey, like my life was just going to be full of trauma and that's it. I wasn't necessarily thinking that I was gonna be a villain, although sometimes I wasn't very nice. One of the things that I struggled with personally was not believing in myself, and therefore I would not believe in others. So I was constantly, "Oh, do you think you can do that? Do you think you should do that? I don't know, that might be out of your league. You might not be able to get that done." And I was constantly pushing those negative things onto other people because I wasn't secure in myself. And it wasn't until about a decade ago, maybe a little bit longer. And this is an interesting thing that you actually made a post not too long ago about your journey and the decision that you made that changed your life. And it wasn't until I made that decision and started really looking inwards to find what was inside and what I really wanted and what I really desired that I realized that everything, everything that I want, everything that I need, everything that I could ever possibly dream of, all comes from within, all of it. So for me, trauma and so many people, um, a lot of people disagree with me when I say, like, trauma was my gift. I am who I am because I was forged in those fires. If I didn't go through what I went through and I didn't make the decisions that I made in order to that's very true, Sandra. In order um, to make that change, I don't really know what would have happened.
Well, there's a sense in which, like Jeremiah brought up, the shadow side of things. I mean, there are things that are parts of our history that are shadowy or dark or destructive. And part of the challenge in life is incorporating that back into yourself. And when you look at stories that deal, like Star Wars, that deal with villains as like the shadow side of the hero, part of the hero's quest is to figure out what to do with that. Do you give into the darkness or do you transform it somehow? And heroes figure out how to transform it. The thing about,
Yeah.
like, when we talk about this too, and I remember the post you were talking about. For those of you who didn't see it, the post that I did that Sam's referring to is I was talking about back in my drinking days. I spent most of my 20s and the better part of my 30s too at the bottom of the bottle. I mean, I used to drink lots and lots. I'm talking the like wake up, hit a bottle of hard liquor, drink all day while working, like full blown functional drunkenness, right? And I say drunk as opposed to alcoholic because alcoholics go to meetings. Um, it's a joke. And it's okay to make light of that stuff sometimes. Um, but
You laugh or you cry, right?
and I've done both, and it's okay to do both. Um,
It is.
the thing about the decision that I made, which was eventually that I just got to a point where it had been going and going and going, and it was so awful that like I knew I was either going to quit or I was going to quit because I was going to die. Like I would have killed myself if I had kept drinking that
Mhm.
way. Um, I finally just decided, decided, I'm just not going to do this anymore. Um, and there's a separate, more complicated conversation about alcoholism as an addiction and whether you can decide and the biochemistry of all that. I have to bracket that because it's just too big of a conversation. For me, the way I experienced
Mhm.
it, it was a decision and I quit. This ties in with this idea of a phoenix because like mythologically, the thing that happens with the bird is the bird actively makes a nest with these. This is going back to like Greek mythology with roots back in Egypt. It makes this nest, aromatic twigs and whatever it builds it out of, and lights it on fire. And the bird burns itself. And then from the ashes, it's reborn. Well, that's a
Mhm.
decision to erase a current self to be born to a new self. And a lot of people who struggle with addiction deal with that because when you leave the addiction, not only has the practice and the biochemistry of all that been there, but just the way you live your life. Like I was constantly drunk or right on the verge of it. And so
Mhm.
many of my friendships, my relationships were shaped by that too. A lot of people who used to drink or do drugs and they quit, they like you lose your drinking buddies, like those people are not there anymore. So your whole world shifts. And that's
Mhm.
a lot of what the Phoenix is about. It's about making that decision to burn the old in order to be born to the new.
Absolutely. So the catalyst for me was watching, the movie The Secret, and it was, like, all this woo-woo stuff about, like, the universe and thinking positive and all this other stuff, but the woo-woo stuff is not woo-woo, people. It works. It's the power of belief and really just deciding that this is what you're gonna do and doing it. And one of the interesting things that you had mentioned in the comments of that post was that you didn't remember when you made the decision. You can clearly remember making the decision where you were, everything about everything, but you don't remember the day. You don't know how many days sober you are. You don't know um, any of the specifics, right? And a lot of people on these journeys, they have those counts. When I made that decision, I didn't notate it either. I just made the decision and said, "This is what I'm gonna do." So I say it's like a decade-ish, probably a little bit more at this point, probably like 13, maybe 14 years now, that I made the decision that I'm no longer gonna be negative. At that point in my life, I was so stressed out. Anxiety attacks multiple times a day, panic attacks multiple times a week, and it was just this chaotic feeling that was inside of me that something needed to change or I was gonna break. And it was a scary place to be, and this was after all of my trauma had happened. And it was because I didn't process any of the stuff. I just kinda, like, picked it all up, shoved it in a box, and threw it to the side. I guess in a way, I was building my nest, and I set it on fire, and I was reborn. And now I always have to give credit to Adam because it really wasn't until Adam told me, um, that my story was important, that it could help people, that I realized just how extraordinary my circumstances were, because for me, it was just normal. So oftentimes we look at our backstories and we just think it's kind of normal because it's just our life. But sometimes we're extraordinary people that go through extraordinary things and we make the decision to be even more extraordinary.
I So I think we talked. Let me pick up on one thing that I saw slide by in the comments. Sandra said earlier that like there are a lot of folks on LinkedIn who have had addiction struggles. And I see them too. Like Sandra, you're right. Like there's a bunch of them. And I even try
Mhm.
not to talk about mine too much because I'm like, here I am, another middle-aged white dude who used to be a drunk. Like we're a dime a dozen. Um, but that reminds me of, and Sam, I think I told you about this, and everybody, I don't know if any of you are Stephen King fans, but he wrote a book called Doctor Sleep that was the sequel to The Shining, which is much more well known. Spoiler alert, I'm going to
Mhm.
tell you a little bit about it. But the main character, Dan, who is the grown up version of the little boy from The Shining,
Mhm.
has ridiculous drug abuse and alcohol problems that he's struggling with. And there is this event that happens early in the book where he does something like really awful, and it plagues him throughout the whole story. It's a touch point that comes up over and over again as you go through the book. And there's finally this point of reckoning at the end of the story where the like big, supernatural conflict of the book is resolved. And now he has this very internal, very personal conflict that he has to do. And it's that he's going to go to an
Mhm.
AA meeting. He's getting his 10-year pen, and he's ready to confess this thing that he's done in front of a group. Like part of his process is that he needs to confess this. So he goes and he stands up and he starts to explain and tell this story of this awful thing he did. And everybody, comes out, and everybody, there's like people in the kitchen getting the coffee ready, and they come out and they're leaning, listening intently, and everybody's tuned into him. And he gets a little bit of the story. And once he talks about what he's done and what the event was, he breaks down into tears, and people in the audience start to yawn. The people in the back go back to making their coffee. Um, and it
Mhm.
turns out that it's not the big bad that he thought it was, because in a community like that, that story is familiar. Everybody knows
Mm.
that story. So within the group, it can feel kind of, there's nothing special about my story. Certainly within your own head, it can feel that way. But it's the people who are outside of that group. Those are the ones who need to hear the story, because they're not in the
Mhm.
club. They don't know how those stories break down. They don't know what the impact is. So that's why you need to tell your story. I need to tell my story. And everybody, over here in the comments, you guys need to tell yours too.
Yeah. All of our stories are important, right? And we just think, "Oh, like, I'm just another middle-aged white guy who used to drink alcohol. Me, I'm just another, middle-aged white female or like mixed females, Hispanic and white." Like, who we are as people, we're molded because of what we went through. And if we don't share who we have become because of our obstacles, our challenges, the struggles that we've faced, how are we supposed to pass on these lessons that we learned? How are we supposed to pass on our wisdom? How are the people who are behind us supposed to understand what steps that they can take in order to become a better version of themselves? And that was kind of the thing that got me to realize that for me, a lot of the things that I talk about, um, it's kind of uncomfortable sometimes. It's not necessarily comfortable for me to get out and talk about the things that happened in my past. It's not comfortable to talk about, my mom's suicide attempt or the things that happened with her and her domestic abuse and all of those things. But now that I know that those things are not normal, I feel some type of responsibility, I guess, to end that stigma, to make people realize that, like, I used to be ashamed of my story. I used to think that there was something wrong with me, and there's not. And, like, even when I got my diagnosis, when I got my PTSD diagnosis, I had known it for years, but because of the things that I went through in life and because of my mom's ex-husband constantly belittling her and putting her down and, calling her crazy, I never wanted those things to be associated with me. So, I never sought any type of help, never sought any type of outside, assistance with anything. So, all of these struggles, it was like, "Yeah, I probably got PTSD. Yeah, I probably got anxiety. Yeah, I probably got this. Yeah." But until I actually got the diagnosis, it was like, wow, I'm actually not crazy. Like, these are just normal reactions to abnormal situations. And sharing that now, it's like, okay, yeah, PTSD sucks. But I kind of wear it as a badge of honor because there was another option and I didn't take it. And now I share.
Well, I love that, like, as a couple of folks in the audience have pointed out, that like you got to share these stories so that other people can connect with you, right? Like Sandra and John were both saying things like this, that like you break down these walls between us. We all feel like, I was just having this conversation the other day with some folks about the importance of talking about loneliness and what it means to be alone and why people feel alone and things that we can do to make the world feel less lonely for ourselves, but also
Mhm,
for people around us. And one of the things is breaking down the walls of silence around stories like this and getting rid of the stigma. And you get rid of the stigma by
mhm,
normalizing the conversation. And culturally, like, we're getting better and better at this, but we're not done. So we have to keep having the
mm-mm,
talks. And whether that's, sharing a diagnosis, whether that's sharing just your fears about something, or whether it's sharing your story, all of that is important. And one of the things about story is, like, almost everybody I'm seeing in the comments, like, I know all of you guys. I've looked at all of your profiles at some time or another. And I don't think
mhm,
anybody out there is a history buff. But one of the things when we study history that they teach us, that they quiz us on, is dates, right? Dates are very easy to kind of put down, as you can put it in a bullet point, you can put it in a multiple choice question, you can answer it. It's either yes or no. You got it right or you got it wrong. It's one of the things that's
mhm.
attractive about those kind of markers. But when we start talking about things like therapy, counseling, coaching, we get more focused on milestones. Milestones being events, like things that are transformative, things that move the story forward in meaningful ways. When you study history, a lot of history professors will tell you, listen, don't get hung up on the dates. You study the dates in middle school, you memorize them in high school so that there's something they can quiz you on easily. But once you
Mhm.
move on to trying to understand history at a deeper level, the dates aren't quite as important anymore. It's about the movements, it's about the
Right.
way things are happening, how they're affecting each other, and how that informs the present. And that's what so much of talking about your past and your story behind you, what that's about too. You talk about it to help inform the present.
Well, yeah, because so one of my superpowers is empathy, right? I'm I can just sense how people are feeling and I adjust how I react accordingly. I have that because of my past. I have that because I lived in an environment that lacked empathy and I didn't want to pass that on. I didn't want to put that more into the world. And the decision to not continue that was one that I had to make. And so many other things, right? Empathy, trustworthiness, all these things that we become and that we put out into the world and people see us now and we're like, we're great people, right? We share our stories and we try to elevate people and we try to lift people up. If we don't go back, if we don't dig into our past, if we don't understand the things that have occurred, if we don't, I don't want to say study, but reflect and really put intention into how you think and get down to the root cause, right? I say it all the time. I had that black box. Everything just got shoved into that black box. And it overflowed and it was a mess many, many times until I started going through that mess and really unpacking some of that trauma. I would reorganize it, put it in another box, put it inside the box. So now I have a box full of little mini boxes that I can go back and I can reflect on and I can learn from and move forward. And those lessons learned, you can't do that if you ignore your past. You can't do that if you're like, oh, you know what? My past is my past. I'm just going to go forward. No,
What's the old adage
dive
about
deep. Go.
those who don't study history, right? You're doomed to repeat it.
Yeah, you're destined to repeat it.
There's a
I did it for years. It was a terrible cycle.
right. How many round? Well, I mean, that's the same thing with me with my drinking, right? Like it was just cyclical for years and years and years. This is the tie-in between the drinking and the loneliness. Like when I got into grad school, it wasn't long before I kind of felt out of place. I could have been in place, but I needed help and I was too young and foolish or whatever to find that help. So I ended up getting distracted with like partying and drinking and whatever. Well, when you're living that kind of life, you're not necessarily building better relationships, and you need better relationships if you're not going to feel lonely. So I would
Mhm.
feel more lonely and then I would self-medicate to make myself feel better, or I would go out to a party and drink to have fun. Well, and then the next
Yep.
day, I felt worse about everything, and it just became this constant spiral. And instead of saying, hey, this is not working too well, maybe I should think about why this is not working well, and maybe I should do something different. I just kept doing the same
Yeah.
stupid stuff, and the hole just
Yep.
got deeper and deeper and deeper. You know the kind of corollary. Have you guys heard this too? There's a corollary to the those who don't study history are doomed to repeat it. Do you know this one,
Mhm.
Sam? About
No.
those who do. So those who don't study history are doomed to repeat it. Those who do study history are doomed to watch them.
Ooh, it's true. It's so
And
it's
the
so
thing
true.
about sharing your story is that's a chance for you to actually do something about it instead of just watching them.
Yeah. And it's frustrating. It's frustrating to be the ones who study history, right? Because you see people in these circles and just going around, and you're like, "What are you doing? Just stop. Just do this." And it's like they're until they're ready, right? Until they are the ones making the decisions, like, I can't make that decision for somebody else.
Yeah.
They have to be the one that's doing it.
Yeah.
It's like addicts. If you force an addict to go to rehab, if they're not willing to do it, the chances of them going through the program, coming out, and going right back into addiction are very high.
Yeah. Yeah.
But if they take that, if they make that decision, if they're the ones who walk through the door because it's their choice, the chances of them coming out and staying clean are much higher.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And for me, when I made the decision to be positive, I didn't want negativity in my life at all. Every time, anytime that there was any type of negativity, it was no, 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 don't put that into the universe. Babe, don't. And he's like, Sam, it's not the universe. Those are the brakes. I need to change the brakes. I'm like, okay, but don't talk about the things that might happen because you don't. I understand that if you don't change the brakes, we could get into an accident. Just change the brakes. stop stop talking about what you have to do and just do it. And making that decision, I I was just so adamant, and it was odd for me in the beginning, especially. It's very weird when you go through when you make that decision. The first couple of months for me, and I'm interested to hear your thoughts too, um, felt very awkward. It was like it was like I was constantly trying to look for something that I was I wasn't expecting to be there. And then when I was like, "Huh, am I just seeing things? Am I just making up stuff?" Or if I would try to like complimenting myself, and still to this day I struggle sometimes to compliment myself, but just telling myself that I'm a good person or telling myself that I look pretty or whatever the case is, it felt very awkward because for so long I picked myself apart. I would stare in the mirror and say, "Oh, look at this, look at that, look at this, look at that. Nobody's going to love you. You're always going to be this. Look at your scars. Look at," and they my scars are there and I'm stuck with them. Like, I have to live with the memories of bad decisions and trauma. Those will never go away. But I don't hate them anymore. I've embraced them. And it's this weird thing to embrace the beauty of pain. And getting to that point is super freaking awkward. It's like, what am I supposed to do? This just feels so weird and fake. And when I would get anxiety or when I would be triggered by something, I would want to just shut down and disassociate. So having to feel feelings, having to feel emotions and sit with them was weird and awkward. And to be around people who were negative felt like I felt that draw to complain or to want to be negative and stew with them or hold a grudge or whatever the case was. And fighting that was difficult. How did it feel for you when you were like, "You know what? That's it. I'm not going to drink
Well, I mean,
anymore."
that's the thing about these kind of shifts. Like when you're talking about, an enormous shift, like hypothetically, say somebody decided to give up like something like ice cream, which would be crazy.
That would be
See you
crazy.
over there, Jeremiah. I don't know. You should think that through. Listen, ice cream is important. Um, wait,
That's not going to
let me
last.
stop for 1 second though here and kind of just step outside of the conversation for a second because you were talking about looking at yourself and like feeling confident, being able to compliment yourself. I can't tell exactly, but I feel like I need to ask how you feel about that hoodie.
I feel like I believe.
Ah. Do you guys
I
know
believe
Sam's
in
got merch
myself
now?
now.
What? I thought that was one of your shirts. I was like,
It is. It's my favorite too.
Actually, this is going to sound corny, but I seriously had, maybe it might sound corny, it might not. But earlier I was like, oh man, I should have like ordered one of your shirts to wear for this live, but I didn't even think about it. So, so much for being like the star first guest. Missed a major opportunity right there.
I'm too
Pow.
tall. I have a thing.
Yeah, be careful. Like, if you
I have a
if you stand up and you've got something up there, then it's going to spoil the illusion. People are going to be like, "Oh, wait, you're in like a small box with a light and a camera."
I have a pole that like runs across my head, and I'm tall. I'm 5'10", so I'm pretty tall.
I've met
So
Sam
if
in
I
person, y'all. She
stand
is
up,
tall.
yeah,
It
that was awesome.
was
I
awesome.
loved having the conversation with you. It
Was
was,
it like 2.5 hours or something that we sat there? We went for
yeah,
pizza,
I
you
was
guys. We
really
sat and talked
surprised.
forever.
Yeah, I was really surprised they didn't kick us out. Busy pizzeria
That
in
poor
the middle of
server. We were
Queens.
blocking that table up for forever. Yeah. It's all right.
They were
I
like, "You're
waited tables for like 10 years. I put in my time,
fine."
Anyway, all right. so yeah, but coming back to your serious question about like how I felt about that change, one thing that I Amara, the
I
beanie.
know.
Beanie, yes. Yes.
I have to get on my website so that I can go to Printful so that I can get beanies.
So
One day.
when we talked earlier about going in circles, right? I had a little period of time. Well, I had a couple of periods where I dried up for a little while. I had one period where I was living with a friend of mine, who had had a rough time. He had struggled with alcohol addiction and cocaine too. He was clean. I was clean. We moved in together, and we lived together for a while. And things went pretty well until he started using again, and I had to kick him out. It was really rough. I was terrified of being around that stuff because I have kind of an addictive personality, and Like the harder drugs like that, like I swear, if I had ever touched that stuff, I probably wouldn't be here. Um,
Mhm.
but fortunately, I never did. So he, though, had spent a little bit of time in a sober house, which meant that while we were living together, I got to kind of learn from him some of the things he had learned from some of those guys.
Mhm.
And one of them had told him this. He said, listen, people always say, this time it's going to be different. Here's the problem. It's always the same time. The only thing that can
Mhm.
be different is you. And that is the thing about the decision. Is a decision is something internal. You know, a decision is like
Mhm.
when you mentioned like going to rehab or having an intervention. Like an intervention doesn't work if the addict is like, no, I'm not going to do it. Like the intervention isn't about, we're going to make you do this. The intervention is, we need you to buy into this. Like we want you to make this decision to go to rehab.
Right.
Now, sometimes those interventions work better. Sometimes they work worse. Sometimes there's force involved. Sometimes there are threats. Most of the time, I think when they work best, and I don't have experience with them, but from the stories I've heard, when they work best, it's often because there's a connection that's made. And the addict doesn't want to see the bits of their world that they still care about destroyed. So they decide
Right.
to go. And Jeremiah mentioned this earlier in the comments with fear. Fear is a powerful motivator. If you're afraid of losing something, you'll be willing to make a decision to change, even if it means burning down everything, a la Phoenix style, right? And it is circle of control versus influence. You can't control what an addict is doing, right? But you can
Mhm.
influence them. And addicts can't control their environment, right? The only thing you can control is yourself. So whether it's, you know, facing an addiction, whether it's facing something traumatic in your past, whether it's facing a diagnosis like ADHD or PTSD, you have to decide to engage with that. If you
Mhm.
think that the environment is going to change, I mean, that can help a little bit, right? Like you can go to a different place and it may help a little bit,
Mhm.
but the big change has to be inside, because you can always decide to go back to the other environment, right? Like if
Mhm.
you're in an abusive relationship and you get out of it and you decide, I'm not going to do this anymore. Well, you could always like subtly slip into finding somebody else and then slowly sliding back into a relationship like that,
Mhm.
addiction, whatever else it is. You can always find a way to slide back into that. For me, when I quit, it was really abrupt, um, and really weird, like super weird. You know, the thing about like people who drink quitting drinking is you get, and there are a few comedians who have made like great bits out of this, um, but just the crazy looks you get from people, and people are like, you know, oh, hey, you want something to drink? You're like, oh, I don't drink anymore. And they're like, oh, and they just don't know what to do, right? Like you don't want a beer. So, all right, well, if you
Yeah.
don't know if you don't want a beer, I don't know what to do with you. Like you're at this, why are you even at this party?
Yeah.
We had it when my wife and I, no, it wasn't our wedding. It was another wedding. But like I quit drinking shortly before there was a wedding in the family, and my wife's Polish, and they know how to drink. Um, so at one of the weddings, like right after I had quit, everybody was drinking and doing shots, and you know, just the whole wedding party atmosphere. And some somebody was like, Nathan, come on, dude. And it was, you know, like two or three of them. Hey, come on, have a shot with us, you know. And then I'm like, no, I quit drinking. They're like, oh yeah, come on, it's a wedding, you know, whatever. Like the the one cousin was like looking at me again, like I had two heads, you know, like, what do you mean you don't want to drink? And I kept telling him, like, no, I'm good. No, I quit. No. Like I quit.
Yeah.
No. Like I really quit. Like, no, like I can't. And finally his wife like puts her hand on his shoulder and is like, no, I think he's serious. And when she said that, he like, you know, I mean, he's got eyes the size of dinner plates. Like he just couldn't believe it. But he relented after that. And there was a lot of that, you know. I mean, fortunately, I did have um, enough people around me who knew me well enough and had seen me kind of at my worst that they knew it was needed. So in some cases, those
Mhm.
conversations went pretty quickly because they were just like, you know, oh, I get it. Yeah, it was a good decision. You should have quit a long time ago. Yeah.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting that you said that you had a lot of people who had saw you at your lowest. For me, I don't know that I ever really let people see me at my lowest. I perpetually wore a mask. Like, it was basically part of me. It was my identity. And I I think that I shouldered a lot of, um I always felt like I had to be the responsible one. Like, I wasn't supposed to, um, act a certain way or be a certain way. It was always y you're supposed to be the role model. You're supposed to be the happy one and the good one and the bubbly one so that your younger siblings will look up to you and they'll follow you. They didn't listen. They did whatever the hell they wanted. If you guys are out there, like, I missed out on a ton of stuff because I just wanna be a good role model.
Circle of influence, right?
Yeah,
With them, no influence.
0. No control either.
Right.
But, I was actually having a conversation with Tommy the other day, and I realized that a lot of my I've shared a lot of the traumatic events that have happened to me with him. I'm very open and honest about what I've been through. I don't necessarily feel like I've always been open and honest about my feelings about them. Now that I'm more in tune with my emotions and trying to understand why I feel the way I do and what those feelings are, like, emotions for me are super important now. But but yeah, until I started really doing that intentional work, I didn't realize that I kept Tommy in the dark with a lot of things because I was, I don't know, scared of judgment, I guess. And I've been with this man for 21 years now, but I'm just now starting to share emotions and this is how I feel. And Meg, she's not here anymore. She had to leave to go feed the tiny humans, but she shared this video. It's not about the nail. And when I saw that, like, I will literally tell Tommy now sometimes, I'm like, it's not about the nail. Okay. It's not about the nail. This is how I'm feeling, and I just need you to understand this is how I'm feeling and just be there. And bye, guys. And it was it was a lot. But that reflecting, that doing that internal work, doing that intentional work, man, it's changed my life.
Well, and that, yeah, I mean, that work is harder, right? Like, this is kind of back to the history tests, right? The high school
Mhm.
level stuff is the multiple choice stuff. It's the dates. It's the being able to say XYZ happened, right?
Mhm.
The next level stuff is starting to process through that and understand what it
Right.
means for you. And the graduate level work is being able to share that with somebody else in a meaningful way. And
Mhm.
so when I
It's terrifying
oh, absolutely.
to get to
Yeah.
the graduate
Yeah. No, 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 without a doubt, without a doubt. I mean, that's another one of the things, right? Like, it's you got to do all this freaking work to to process, to figure out where you're at, what you felt, how you feel about what you felt, how you feel about what you feel, all of that big, just soup of stuff. And once you've got that kind of constellation in place in the sky and you like know what it all is, you know your way around it, you understand all of it. Well, now you got to explain it to somebody else. And like, how do you put that into
in a
language?
way that they'll understand.
Right. How do you put it into
Yeah.
language that bridges the gap, especially if it's, if I'm talking to one of those other dudes who's a middle-aged white guy that has had experience with drinking and, almost ruined his life, I get those guys, like we can have that, we can jump
Right.
in like mid-story and we get it. But when you're
Mhm.
talking to somebody who doesn't have that same experience, well, okay, which part of the story do I start with? Like, what feelings are the most important, and how do I? whether they're tough or not, whether they're gracious and accepting or not, there's always going to be a little part of you that's afraid, like, what if this is too much for them? What
Mm,
if what if it
yes.
scares them? Or what if it's just
Mhm.
more than they can carry? Because you don't want to, like, you're already exhausted carrying it. You don't want to burden somebody else, right?
Right. Yeah. It's definitely something that at I've been sharing my story now, let me see. Me and Adam had that conversation back in March of last year. And that was really the point where I was just like, "You know what? This is a really cool nest." I have a phoenix now. And when that happened, it was like, okay, I was excited to share because I was wanting to help, like, my heart just wants to help people, um, but then there was this tremendous amount of hesitation because how much of my story are people going to take and absorb? How much of my story are people gonna take and, like, deflect? And how many people are gonna take that and judge me on it? And how many people are gonna pity me because of my past? And that's, like, never ever the intention. Like, please, guys, if you're ever like, "Oh my gosh," like, yes, there are people empathy, like, "I'm so sorry you went through what you went through." Yes, but don't harp on it.
Right.
We
Right.
feel like it's like, "Oh my god, you poor thing." Like, don't ever use poor thing if you're ever talking to somebody and they are willing to share their story with you. If they're gonna share with you, you oh, you poor thing, like, it's this instant like, "Oh, crap. There they go. Now they have pity, and now they're gonna feel bad for me, and now every time I look at them, all they're gonna see is my trauma, and they're not gonna see all the strength and resilience that I've built up over all these
Right.
years."
Right.
So, it's this constant balancing act of, like, when do I spread my wings, and when do I land and just sing?
There are all these assumptions that are constantly at play, with these stories, and for anybody who's listening to you when you tell your story, you have to wonder who that audience is, and
Mhm,
are they in a position where they're going to make that assumption that you need pity, that you need to be, oh, you poor thing, because, like, if you say, oh, you poor thing, after hearing the story, well, you've jumped ahead. Like, you've jumped ahead to the
mm,
conclusion of, this is what the story did to you, and this is where you're at
mhm,
now, that you need, some type of gentle hand. I mean, not that gentleness is bad,
mhm.
right? But this, like, pity kind of thing. Um,
Kid gloves.
right, right. You don't have to come
Yeah.
at me with, soft white padded gloves.
Yeah, I don't need to be handled delicately.
Right.
It's this it's just a it's just a balancing act. And, I made a post, the carousel with, Adam, where he had reached out when I went into a depression, in December, and it was tough, and I kinda shared it a little bit on LinkedIn, and I was sharing a little bit of the stories and, sharing my struggles with anxiety and depression and that kinda stuff, but unless you really know me, unless you're, like, really paying attention to me as a person and not just, like, what I post, you wouldn't necessarily see the difference. When I go back and look, I can see, like, when I was struggling, Adam picked up on it, and he was like, "Hey, friend, what can I do to help you today?" And I'm like, "Ugh." I'm like, "I just wanna feel normal." And I absolutely love him for it. Absolutely love him for it because, him and a couple other people reached out because they could sense that I was struggling. And that conversation with Adam was one of those moments where I felt strong enough to have the conversation with him to say, "Hey dude, I really appreciate you reaching out, but that's not helpful for me. Could you maybe just not say that?" And he's like, "Yeah, fine. Cool." And we just went about like with our normal humor and, sarcasm and all that other fun stuff because sometimes this thing up here doesn't act and respond the way that I would like it to. And sometimes I get triggered and go through these cycles of mental health and depression and anxiety and all these things. And knowing that knowing that the things that I put out into the world, that people consume it, it's it's I don't want to say nerve-wracking, but it definitely puts me at a higher sense of like, "Oh, is this too much? Am I sharing too much of my story? Is this gonna come off wrong? Or is somebody gonna judge me? Is this gonna hurt somebody else? Is my story gonna impact somebody and throw them over the edge?" Like, there's so many things, and especially with trauma, because these are tough conversations to have. But the DMs that I get where people are asking, "How did you go about getting your diagnosis? What did you do to, get set up with a therapist?" I had somebody reach out to me after I shared my story with my mom to let me know that her mom actually attempted and successfully, unsuccessfully committed suicide. And I was like, "Oh man, like that's it. I'm never going to write something bad again because it's too much." And then I continued reading her message and she told me how brave I was for sharing and how one day she hoped that she could share her story. And I was like, that right there is why I do what I do. That right there is why I share the stories that I share because I'm not alone. None of us are alone. And, John Connolly, when we had our conversation, like he heard me on a podcast and he DM'd me, he's like, "Man, you've been through some stuff, girl." And I was like, "Yeah, just a little." And he's like, "Well, I've been through XYZ." And I'm like, "Wow, like I had no idea." And it becomes like this secret society of like trauma. And Rachel Lemon, she's a domestic abuse survivor and is now like she's just amazing. She's a phoenix. Um, we go about and we're like, I hate the word victim or survivor. They just feel very negative. Like they hold a negative connotation. Nobody wants to say, "Hey, I was a victim of this," or "Hey, I'm a survivor." Yeah, sure, in some cases, but these things happened and we didn't ask for them to happen. They happen. And there's so many of us that hate those words. So Rachel came up with Sir Thriver.
Ah, I like that one.
And I use
Rachel
it all
Rachel
the time
Lemon?
now.
Yeah,
Rachel
okay. Yeah,
Lemon.
yeah, yeah.
Yep.
Right, right, right.
Yeah. I'm
Ah, it's a
like,
good one.
"Yeah, Sir Thriver." So
Right.
now I just use I'm a Sir Thriver.
How about, I mean, John, when you get that secret handshake, you guys will have that too, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
It's
I like
what
what John's pointing out over here about how people don't know how to react, right? Like there's this whole thing about that we don't know how to even have these conversations. The people who
Mhm.
do know how to have them are often having them with each other. Um,
Correct.
so, I mean, that's part of why, like, the Phoenix Forge podcast is important. Conversations like this are important because you create a space in which those conversations are happening and you're kind of opening those doors, hopefully, for each other to do this stuff. Because it's hard to ask, and we want to care, we want to ask, like we want to check in, but we don't always know how to do it. So just opening the doors to talking about
Yeah.
it is always the first step.
And us, like the people who have been through what we've been through, we have to lead the way because there are so many people out there that want to support. There are so many people. I get DMs all the time. How do I support people who have been through trauma? How should I react to this? Or, how did your husband react to that? Everybody's different. But the more we have these conversations, the more that we open up these lines of communication, the more everybody gets to learn. And the more outspoken we are about our needs and our wants, and to say, hey, this is really helpful. I'd appreciate it if you said this instead of this. These little reframes, these people are coming with such good intentions to want to be there and support. If it makes you feel uncomfortable, you have to say it. You have to say, "Hey, I appreciate the support, but this isn't helpful for me. I would appreciate it if you did this instead." Now that person knows what to do for the next time. Now when they come across it with somebody else, it might not work for the next person, but it might.
Right. Right. And so you build up a flexibility and you build up kind of a catalog of different ways. I mean, I think, one of the biggest takeaways for all of us here is that like the internet and the communities that we live in are full of resources. Like you can go out and you can find frameworks for how to check on people, right? Like even people that you are worried are in like serious life-threatening trouble. There are frameworks out there for how to engage in those
Yeah.
conversations. And you can pick some of those up and learn them and use them. It's always going to be crucial to remember that each time you're in a situation where you are using one of those, the person you're talking to is a person and people vary wildly. So you have to be
Yes.
ready to go with the flow a little bit. And there's an important piece there that, really like the way Amara's putting it here is really good. Is about listening with your heart and, just trying to empathize, trying to listen to people. And if it is too hard, like do use simple words, like start with simple things, start with easy things. You mentioned earlier, like if you're uncomfortable, you can just say, I don't really know. I feel like I need to check in with you, but I don't know how to do that. And if the person says,
Mhm.
I could really benefit from just having somebody listen, you'd be like, okay, well, I can do that. And you just let them vent.
Mhm.
Or, they might be like,
Mhm.
no, I'm good, but like, thanks for checking in, and you roll with whatever they need. If you're
Right.
trying to really be helpful, you have to be aware of what your needs are as you're pursuing theirs. Because if you are coming in with a need to feel helpful or with a need
Mhm.
to save them, then you run the risk of overdoing it. So going easy and listening is always the best place to start, and then staying flexible with that.
Yeah. What is that? KISS? Keep it simple, stupid.
Yep.
It's so we as humans tend to complicate things.
We do. We do.
Such is life.
Right. And I've got a free downloadable 53-page PDF for you on that. Kidding. I'm
To
kidding.
10x your
Right,
simplicity.
to 10x your simplicity. It's the K.
One
It's
word
the
a page.
KIU principle. Keep it simple until.
Oh, Nathan, we have been going at it for an hour. This has been an awesome
Well, it
conversation.
was almost an hour. I was
Um,
late, but technical difficulties.
That's okay. Any last words before we head out for the
Oh
night?
man. Listen, y'all, I did this post, this little post about my kids the other day about how if I were gone, I would tell them I'm not going to be here to listen to you. So listen to each other. I think that
Mm,
listening to each other is one of the most important things that any of us can do. So tell your stories and don't forget to listen to everybody else too, as much as you can.
I don't think I could top that. That's absolutely incredible.
Well, thanks for providing me a
Share
place
your
where I was
story.
prompted to say that. You provided fertile ground and watered the seed. Here are the results of your work. No, thanks for having
Thanks.
me around with you, Sam. This has been good.
Absolutely. It's honestly my pleasure. I absolutely love having conversations with you. We could definitely go on for like ever
I know.
again.
Yeah, yeah. And maybe we'll do it again
It's what
sometime.
we do. Yeah, we'll have to. We have like a yellow brick road thing to discuss one day
We
these
do.
days.
We do. Yeah.
We do. We do. Oh, I guess you'll just have to come back
That's
for it
right.
then.
We're gonna leave the audience hanging on a cliffhanger. Hanging on a cliffhanger. Man,
Moi?
is not well said.
Cliffhangers and Easter eggs.
Yes.
It's my
Your
specialties.
specialties. Yes, they are. Yes, they are.
All right, guys. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. It has been an absolute pleasure. Um, I don't know when the next live is going to be because, like I told you guys originally, I'm kind of experimenting. I don't know if I'm going to do these on Fridays or if I'm going to switch up the nights. I don't know if I'm going to go an hour, half an hour, whatever. But I'll be back with someone at a random time. I'll let you know. Later.